All things have a value. Sometimes the value is paid in coin. Other times it is paid in time and sweat. And finally, sometimes it is paid in blood. Humanity seems most eager to use this latter currency, and we never note how much of it we're spending, unless it happens to be our own. Hey friends, welcome to the Ear Fairy Tales. My name is Letty. Today we're going to do my January wrap-up. I started out the year strong. I read a lot of books, a lot of pages, and I read some very good books, so let's get into it. I read 12 books. I did DNF a couple books, unfortunately, but I did read 12, and I read 4,996 pages, so almost 5,000 pages, and that's not including some of the pages I read of Out, which I have not finished yet, and then some of the pages of the DNFs. I'm just not counting those. But the average number of pages that I read a day ended up being 161, so that's really good. And the different genres I read were horror, sci-fi, fantasy, and like some genre blends. And then the formats I read, mostly physical, and then 2 audiobooks. So overall, aside from the 2 DNFs I had, I did have 1 dud, and a bunch I liked, and a bunch I loved. So we'll get into that now. And as usual, I will have the timestamps down below, and then my reviews will go in order from rants to raves. So just real quick, the book I have not finished yet. Still, I know this has been going on since December. I just get other books that come up and I want to read those instead. Not that this is a bad book by any means. Out by Natsuo Kirino. This is a crime thriller. This I read maybe 20 more pages of. It's just, like I said, other books come up that I'm wanting to read more, but this is really good because I never forget what happens. As soon as I pick it up again, I remember who is doing what, and I don't actually lose my place, so I feel okay on extending this and continuing it on. Hopefully I'll finish it in February. I think I may do it via audio because I've discovered that I can read a couple more books a month by listening to audio, and so I'll probably just listen to it on Audible. Speaking of audiobooks, this is the first book that I DNF'd, and I was listening to this on an audiobook, as mentioned, More Than Human by Theodore Sturgeon, and this is sci-fi, and this had been recommended. This is a classic. I think it might have been written in the 50s or something like that. I just had a hard time following the characters, like who they were, what they were doing. I was like, what is even going on in this book? What is the point? And also there's something really weird with touching. Like they kept mentioning touching people, and it just kind of grossed me out a little bit. And one of the channels that I love to watch, I think it's Secret Sauce of Storycraft. Yeah, that's it. Excellent channel, especially if you love sci-fi. I'll link it down below. And she had mentioned this book in a video, and I was like, oh my god, that's so funny. I just tried to read that and I DNF'd it because the touching thing was weirding me out. And she said that, yeah, and that continues on with the rest of the book. So good call on DNFing this one. Now, this next DNF is kind of surprising to me, and it probably will be to everybody else because this is a well-beloved author. I'm actually reading their Greenbone Saga trilogy right now, so there's a hint on the author. This is a novella, though, and that's Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, and this is fantasy, and I was really excited to read this one. There's nothing wrong with the characters or the plot or the story or the writing. All of that was all good. There's just one thing in particular that I just did not want to keep reading, and I didn't realize how much like animal suffering and death was going to happen in this. So we have this lady here who has a rock that she's training with, and part of they're training so they can go attack these larger monsters. What are they called? Manticore. I read this, it was a while ago that I read this. Anyway, so they train these giant birds' rocks to kill manticores. The manticores are really vicious, violent creatures that just kill people. And so part of their training is they go out and hunt other animals, but it's pretty gruesome, like the descriptions. Like, I don't want to hear about an animal getting its tail ripped off, and I don't want to hear about a deer that has its spine twisted in half, animals having their intestines ripped out and eviscerated. I just, like, the third animal that was described, I was like, okay, no, I can't do this anymore. And that's really the only reason. So if you are also an animal lover like I am and you're sensitive to any kind of animal violence, I would stay away from this. But if that kind of thing doesn't bother you, I would recommend it. Okay, now we're getting into the books that I fully read and rated, and this one is definitely a dud. I did finish it though, so that's why I'm giving it a 2.5 star. And that is sadly Ink Blood Sister Scribe by Emma Törsz. And this is like a fantasy thriller, dark academia-ish a little bit, like literary fiction. I don't know, it's like a blend of a few different things. And this I did listen to on audiobook. I didn't like the audiobook. I didn't like the narrator's voice, and I did not like the voice she used for the male characters especially. And I thought, well, maybe I would like the story without the audiobook if I just read it, but I don't think so either. I mean, I may have rated it a 3-star if I just read it versus the audiobook, which I gave 2.5 stars. And this is about scribes who use their blood to write books. It's like spells that they write with their blood, and there's family secrets, and there's a magical library, and like there's like 3 main different things going on, and they're like 2 of the things are related. And then there's another one where it comes up and I'm like, wait, why is this person being focused on? How is this related to the 2 other people, like the 2 sisters? And I'm thinking, well, it has to be related, of course. There's going to be some kind of tie-in. Well, usually in books where you switch between perspectives like that, you get like little breadcrumbs throughout where you're able to kind of piece it together and then slowly see the connection until it finally converges and you're like, oh, that's how everything falls into place. But these things were mainly kept separate. It was almost like 3 totally different stories were going on, and then they didn't even converge until like chapter 18 or 19, which was fairly like a while into the book. I want to say like at least 2/3 into the book probably. Then finally everything started connecting. And in the synopsis, it does say that suspenseful, richly atmospheric, and it has mystery, magic, romance, and intrigue. And speculative fiction. But when it first starts out, it starts out with romance. And I'm like, wait, that's like barely mentioned in the synopsis, but it's quite a big part of the beginning of the book. And it was just kind of annoying. I mean, you all know I'm not a romance reader, so maybe for other people they wouldn't care. Obviously, I was curious enough to see how it was going to end, so I did finish it. I did write notes though while I was reading it. Like I said, romance was like right in the beginning. Oh, there were some like gross things. I don't need like a description of what her urine sounds like when it hits the toilet bowl. And then there's the hint of the magic with the blood, but it's not really mentioned until the end of chapter 1. So you have like the romance mainly, and then you finally get to like the book and magic part at the end of chapter 1. Oh yeah, and then there was like a book that was being written with period blood, like menstrual blood. Like, I don't need to know that either. And also they said, oh, it's basically the same thing as regular blood, so you can use it. It's interchangeable. No, it's not. It's not the same at all. And along with like each chapter being a different perspective, like there's like 3 main ones that it switches between. It also switched between like present and past, and so you would get present day and then like some history, and then it just kind of seemed like jumbled together. Like the audiobook itself was kind of hard to follow along. I would have to rewind and go back and re-listen several times. Now maybe that's because I was multitasking and doing other things. I was at work, but Coming up later in the video here, there's another audiobook that I listened to that I did the same thing with. I listened to it while I was working, and I didn't have that problem at all. So I think it's just the book. And maybe this was part of the narrator's fault. It was like boring, but then the narrator was trying to make it super dramatic. So maybe that's another thing that kind of turned me off with it. I didn't really like any of the characters. Even the ones you're supposed to like, I think, I didn't really like. Unfortunately, like I said, 2.5 stars, and I will be unhauling it. So now we're going to get into the books that I either liked or loved. And this first one was highly anticipated, and it was okay. And that was Nestlings by Nat Cassidy. And if you're not familiar with this, this is described as a mix between Salem's Lot and Rosemary's Baby. Now, I have not read either one of those, but based on what I know from those books, that does seem like an accurate comparison. And in this, we follow a couple who just had a baby, and they won the lottery. And they won an apartment in this really prestigious, like, upscale apartment building, like a high-rise building. Unfortunately, the lady had a really difficult birth, and she ended up being paralyzed from the waist down, and she's now in a wheelchair. They did make some accommodations to the apartment to make it a little easier for her, but she's still up on like the 14th floor or something like that. So she's a little worried about being up that high. But anyway, there's weird things going on there. I really did enjoy the unique take on vampires in this, and I like the story, I like the format and the writing. You got to switch between perspectives, and it was done in a unique way, easy to follow. It seemed like it could easily be a TV show or like a TV series. And although books about motherhood aren't anything I'm really interested in, he did write it well, like the topic of motherhood and postpartum depression. Reading the author's note, it sounds like he definitely did his research, or he was able to talk about it in an empathetic and realistic way. However, I did not like either of the main characters. I found them both really annoying, and I was kind of like, I don't really care what happens to these people because they're so annoying. Now, before we get into another thing that I didn't like about it, I will share with you a couple of the quotes that I did like. Adulthood was all about compromises, wasn't it? You decide what you need, what you want, and shift your priorities around until you find the least bad combination. Each compromise was a link in a chain, and if that chain dragged you down to the bottom of the East River, well, at least you had Netflix and Spotify to distract you while you sank. What does it mean to be a mother? But that was the trick. There was no one meaning. Motherhood was her, was Kathy, was Reed's mom, was this monstrosity in the bowels of a Manhattan skyscraper. Motherhood was joy, was pain, was standing over the crib with a knife, was standing over the crib with a lullaby. Motherhood was breakage, was expansion, was depletion, was fulfillment, was creation, and an endless series of goodbyes. Motherhood was contradiction. That was its beauty. That was its horror. And if it drove you mad trying to square its inconsistencies, well, tough luck, because motherhood cared nothing about what happened inside of you. Motherhood had already taken what it needed from inside of you, and had given it to the world. Anything else was up to you and fate. So, just an example of the writing, which I did enjoy. However, there were some mentions of some other things in here that I did not appreciate. And there were several mentions of this, so I couldn't just look it over. A lot of talk about Kufid. You know, the Kufid 19, the horror of the year of 2020. Now, I have controversial thoughts about all of that, which I cannot say here on YouTube for different reasons. Every time it got brought up, I'm like, okay, seriously, just like roll my eyes. So that was distracting. Unfortunately, it did take away from my overall enjoyment. I just wish it wasn't in there, but it was, so I give this a 3 star. I always do this. 283 pages. The next book I have to talk about, I also liked a little bit more than Nestlings, and that was Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, and this is horror, 251 pages. This is more like a literary horror. It's been compared to Rouge as far as it's about the beauty industry, like skincare and stuff like that. And in this, we follow a classically trained pianist, which I appreciated because I am also a classically trained pianist, and you don't really see that kind of represented in books all that often, at least I haven't. And she ends up working at this like skincare spa, and everybody there seems to look a certain way. They change in kind of weird ways, and there may be questionable practices going on there and how they acquire and create these beauty products. And this is definitely horror. There are some pretty gross things in this, like maybe don't eat while you're reading this. I will mention though, because this isn't really like forewarned to you, and I have never heard this mentioned in a review yet, so I'm gonna go ahead and mention it. There is sexual content in this, just like a few instances, but also there's some non-consensual things that go on in here, like a couple different things, so just heads up on that if you're sensitive to non-consensual things. But the things I did like, this was original, it was well written, it was engaging, it was a fast-paced read, and there were some pretty crazy things that happened, especially towards the end, and I just have a couple quotes that I would like to share with you. My parents never looked as happy and as sad as when they were singing the songs from their youth. I often wondered in these moments what it cost them to never show fragility, only determination and resilience in the face of their new country. In the silence between notes, I began to hear the wound my parents hid from me. I learned the songs by ear, and within a few weeks I was able to play them. Music was a suturing that connected them to their home, and I finally had a part in the healing of our family. It took a long time for me to understand that only people who have had nothing feel the need to keep everything. So yeah, this was really good. It definitely has some conversation about standards of beauty and what people are willing to do to try to adhere to what they think is that standard. And yeah, really good overall. I give it a 3.5 stars. All right, next up I have another book of the month book. One of my loose goals for the year is to read at least one, preferably at least 2 book of the month books a month, because I do have enough to do that. And then eventually I like to get to the point where I'm caught up and I'm reading those books in the month that I get them. I have read more books than I have not, though, with my book of the month, so that's pretty good. But this one I listened to it on audiobook. I would highly recommend the audiobook for Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. And this is sci-fi. This one's 476 pages, and like I said, I highly recommend the audiobook for reasons which I do not want to say because it will spoil it. But let's just say, if you're an audiobook listener, please get the audiobook for this. You won't regret it. And as I mentioned in my review of Inkblood's sister Scribe, this I had no problem following along. I was totally into it the whole time. Just a brief, very brief synopsis is we have this man who wakes up in a spaceship out in the middle of space, and he doesn't remember how he got there and what he's supposed to do, and it slowly kind of comes back to him. And it does say this in the synopsis, the reason why he's out there is because the sun has been dimming on Earth, and it's up to him to go out into space and find the solution. Now, I don't want to say anything more than that because really it's best to go in blind. Like, don't listen to reviews if they're going to tell you anything about the characters or the plot. Don't read the synopsis. All I will say though is this has one of my all-time favorite characters in it. If you've read it, you know who I'm talking about. But I won't say for those of you who haven't read it because it would really spoil it. But let's just say this was engrossing and endearing and Some critiques of this book I've heard are like some people don't like the humor and they don't like the fact that he doesn't really cuss. He uses like alternative words for cussing, but given his profession, like his on-earth profession, it makes sense to me, and I didn't have a problem with the humor. I thought it was just fine. Oh, and I forgot to mention my one critique, the numerous mentions of the anthropogenic change of the climate. And if you like space sci-fi, especially anything having to do with math, physics, engineering, I would definitely recommend this. He gets into details, actually, like he will even break down calculations. I thought it was great. I mean, I love that that was included. I have heard from a lot of people who don't normally read sci-fi that they actually really enjoyed this. So I think that this would be an overall good recommendation for anyone, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next up, we have another sci-fi, and that is Generation Ship by Mammay, or Mammay. I don't know how to say that last name. Sorry. And this is 585 pages, so a little chunky, but I read this so fast. I mean, I think I read it in like 4 days. And this is set on a colony ship, which is basically like a mini country all on one giant spaceship, and they're traveling to a new planet that they think is Earth-like, and they want to go there and colonize it because they've been living on this ship for like 200 years or something like that. So you're basically at the tail end of their life on this ship where they're almost to that Earth-like planet that they hope to be able to live on. And I enjoyed the way that this was written because each chapter you're going to a different character, so you're switching between perspectives, and it reminded me a lot of a TV series, like, you know, how you have a big cast of characters, and then for this part of the episode you focus on this part of the ship, you know, the engineers, and then you go to the captain's area, and then you go to this part and the passengers and like that. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. There's a lot of politics and drama. There's like conflicts between the different departments, and there's some fun stuff having to do with technology and hacking. And I really liked the characters, and I really liked reading from all of their perspectives. I liked the plot, I liked the pacing. I mean, if you like space sci-fi, I highly recommend this. I had this on my radar, and then I looked up books that are like the show Battlestar Galactica because I love that show, and I wanted to read a book that gave me the same feelings, and this actually popped up, and I was like, whoa, that's perfect. I already had this on my TBR, and it popped up as a comparison to Battlestar Galactica. I would say it is similar to that, it's just they're not like battling any other ships. And I do have a couple quotes to share with you. Being stuck here kind of felt like the rest of his life. He could see the problems, but they were complex, and the only solutions they had for them were simple. They needed planning and nuance and time, but were stuck in a culture that demanded immediacy and action. Everybody wanted to fail right now in their own way instead of working together to cobble together something complicated that might actually work in the long term. He wanted to press the argument, make her understand, but it was pointless. She was so convinced that she was right, nothing would penetrate. She was an idealist living in a pragmatic world, willing to pass up the chance to make a little bit of progress for the false dream of the perfect solution. So yeah, this was really fun. Because I like this so much, I added his previous series to my TBR. The first one's called Planetside. I think it has 3 books out right now. The 4th one I think is coming out this year. I will have a video coming up where I'm going to go over all the series that I want to read. There's, I think, 31 or 32 series that I have on my tracker. I have read 4 of them, and I'm on my 5th one, so I am making progress on that. And this one, I gave 4.5 stars. And the next book I have to talk about is actually 3 books because it's a trilogy, and these are the first books that I read this year, so great way to kick off the year. I love this author's work, and this did not disappoint. And that was the Wayward Pines trilogy by Blake Crouch. The first one, Pines, is 300 pages. The second one, Wayward, is 340 pages. And the third and last one, The Last Town, is 300 pages. So altogether it was 940 pages, but I read these all in under a week. So very fast-paced read. It's more like a sci-fi thriller. And in this, we start out following a man who wakes up in a strange place and he is like, where am I? What's going on? What am I supposed to be doing right now? Who can I trust? Where are my people? And so it is I would say it's more like a thriller mystery with a little bit of sci-fi. And it's really cool, actually, the sci-fi aspects, and you find out more as you read. So I don't want to spoil any of it because that's really the main fun part of this first book, especially, is figuring out what's going on. Before I get into the things that I liked, which were numerous, the one thing I did not like, which is prevalent in modern sci-fi, and I know I've mentioned this before, but anthropogenic, the change of ... climate. I'm trying to say it so I don't get flagged with a banner below my video. Anyway, I don't appreciate that anti-human propaganda. I just don't like it. But fortunately, it wasn't like a big part of the book, so I could just kind of like gloss over it, but it just, whenever it's mentioned, I'm like, why? We don't need to have that be the thing, Anyway. Like I said, this was a fast-paced read. I can definitely see the influence of the TV show Twin Peaks. He mentions in the back in the author's note that he wanted to write a series that gave him the same feeling that the show Twin Peaks did. And he also mentions a couple other shows that were an influence, but that was the primary one. And I can definitely see that because there's this like undercurrent of mystery and eeriness. There's even like a touch of horror mixed in there a little bit. And I swear, I have never said, oh, so many times while reading this book. Like every other page is like, this gets wild. This is so fun, so engaging. And if you're not like a huge sci-fi reader, but you're looking to get into it, I would definitely recommend this. Because like I said, it leans more into like the thriller mystery aspect, but the sci-fi part of it is really good. Though I will say, I would love to see a continuation of this series because how it ends, how a series ends, I'm like, what? I need more now. I need more. You can't just end it like that. Anyway, this was really good, really fun, and I highly recommend it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. And next up, we have another trilogy, and this one is a fantasy trilogy. And this one was highly anticipated. This one is well beloved among the booktube community, so I'm so glad I finally read it for myself. And that is the Founders Trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. The first one is Foundryside at 503 pages. The second one is Shorefall at 496 pages. And the third and final one is Locklands at 541 pages. So, how to describe this? Oh, it is so complex, so rich, so original. You live in this fantasy world, and it's a world where it blends like magic and technology, where they do this thing that's called scribing, and basically it's like coding. They can code everyday objects to do certain things. Like they can tell something that they put on themselves that it needs to act like gravity is pushing it a certain way, and so it will fly. Or they can scribe weapons to make the bullets act like they're falling towards Earth instead of going straight. So they go really fast, like different things like that. It's so complex, it's really interesting, and it was written in a way that was really easy to follow. I could definitely visualize everything that they were doing, and it made me think, like, if this really existed though, it would be horrific. It bends reality. That's literally what it does. It's basically rewriting things to believe there's something else. It is so good, so unique. I have never read anything like this. And in this one, we have a full cast of characters, and they are definitely characters. There is one in particular that was my favorite, and I was really sad when I got to the third book because they were no longer there. They didn't make it to the third book. I was so sad. And they like barely even mentioned the character, and I was like, well, what exactly happened? Did I miss it? Like, I need more information here. And then my second favorite character, I don't think you're really supposed to like this other character because they're one of like the villains, but I really did like this other character, and I liked this character the more the books progressed. And this one has some pretty interesting characters. As I mentioned, it has a lot of action and adventure. It has heist and danger and unexpected friendships. It has rivalries. It has battling houses of power. It has politics. And it even has a little bit of like lore and mythology woven into it. This was really fun. I love this. Something that really helped the immersive aspect of this is, well, I do this with all the books that I read physically, is I listen to ambient music or sounds in the background while I'm reading. I found the perfect soundtrack to this series, and I will link it down below because it was so good. And it's actually music from Assassin's Creed, I think, or music meant to go with it, like while you're playing it, I think. Anyway, it's almost 3 hours long. None of the songs repeat. And then each song also has its own artwork on screen that switches. So it is so good. Seriously, I even listen to it when I'm not reading it. It's that good. And I would love to see this as a TV series or movie. That would be so cool to see their magic and technology, like how they do the scribing. And I do have some quotes I would like to share with you. I think like a couple from each book. And the quote that I said at the beginning of this video, that's actually from this book, Foundryside. Reality doesn't matter. If you can change something's mind enough, it'll believe whatever reality you choose. The worst part, just the worst part, is that it tricks you. It makes you think that you're a thing. It makes you resign yourself to becoming a crude good. It makes things out of people so thoroughly they don't even know that they've become things. Even after you're free, you don't even know how to be free. It changes your reality, and you don't know how to change it back. Any given innovation that empowers the individual will inevitably come to empower the powerful much, much more. Oh, I'm many things, but I am not a liar. Maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you, like so many of this city, believe that all the world should be your servant because you haven't ever learned what it's like to be powerless. True, I have seen this many times, and I have seen it fail far more often than I have ever seen it succeed. An emperor's hunger for control will always outlast a moralist's desire for equality and idealism. And even if you succeed, you will have done so using some advantage that will then be used to shape new hierarchies, new elites, new empires. Things like me do not have homes. When you outlive civilizations, the conceit gets a little moot. You could say that we were once people, and thus had homes and lives, and this is true, but it is a little like the glass out there on those flats. In some places it has returned to sand, but in others it is thick and hard and resists any cracking or crumbling. Is it then still sand, or is it glass? Does it remember being sand? Or does it matter after such a transmutation? That's how we all think of ourselves, as people in a tale, living our stories. But if you live long enough, you see it's not a story at all. It just keeps going. People come and go like butterflies in the wind. Cruelties don't always meet justice. And maybe you'll never meet the end you wanted or expected or deserve. Maybe you'll never meet an end at all. Eventually, you're just left with scraps, pieces of unfinished stories, threads of tales no one ever got to live, pieces of works you never got to perfect. Don't you see? That's not just it at all, is it? A people are more than just the tools they use. So just an example of the writing, which I really enjoyed. However, I did just remember now something that I didn't like. There's just one thing. There's just one thing I didn't like. And that was the use of exclamation points. There are so many exclamation points. It's like everything is exciting. Everything's an emergency. It's like, okay, do we need that many? do we really need that many exclamation points? I think we could have eased up a little bit on it, but that's such a minor thing compared to all the good that this series is. And if this has been on your radar, now is the sign to go ahead and read it. Highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. I scooted over it a little bit. I kind of want to show off the other little bookshelf I have here, but it's kind of hard to see. Anyway, can you see any of that? I am going to be doing a bookshelf tour once I get my other bookshelf up and some things organized. I'm probably going to have that bookshelf be my series bookshelf because, as I mentioned, I have quite a bit of series on my TBR and I kind of want to keep them organized. Anyway, getting into my favorite book of the month, another 5-star, and this is another fantasy. This was highly anticipated. Every review I see of this book, people have just raved about it, absolutely loved it, and I am glad to be included in that group. And that is A Spear Cut Through Water by Simon Jimenez. And this was a little bit of a chunky book, 518 pages. This was an intricately woven tapestry of a story. I mean, pure art in its written form. So beautiful, so unique, so original, an epic standalone fantasy with lore and mythology. And it's a really unique storytelling where there's kind of 3 different formats going on, where you have the story being told to someone, and then you have a play going on that's telling the story, and then you have the story itself, and they all just kind of weave in and out of each other. At first I had a little trouble like situating myself and figuring out what exactly was going on, but then it didn't take too long though, and I immediately clicked. I was like, oh, okay, I totally get what's going on, and from then on it was so easy to follow. So just a heads up for those of you who haven't read it, if you're interested, there are those kind of 3 different threads going along. They're all the same story, it's just like different angles of it. So you have somebody telling the story to someone, the play going on that's also showing the story, and then you have the actual story playing out. But the story itself playing out is the majority of it. Really good, really unique. I have never seen another story written like this. Really cool. This is like a quest adventure. You do get a map in the beginning here, and it follows a royal family who has ruled in maybe a not so nice way, and people are kind of fed up with it. We follow a couple people trekking along with some valuable luggage, we shall say, and it's dangerous and a bit tense at times, and such beautiful writing, really interesting characters, and it's engrossing and immersive, and I was just totally sucked into the story. And even when I wasn't reading it, I was thinking about it. And I would almost liken it to like a puzzle where, you know, you're putting a puzzle together, all the pieces are jumbled together, you're not quite sure how to put it all together, and you start organizing by color. And you're able to get like the border put together, and then you're like, oh, okay, I can see the outline here and what's supposed to be going on. And then as you fill in each piece, it just gets more clear and more clear. And then once you put that final puzzle piece in, you have this beautiful artwork, and that's what this story is. I mean, even the cover itself is absolutely gorgeous. And as I mentioned, kind of a chunkier book, over 500 pages, but I read it quickly in like 4 or 5 days probably. And that's pretty good considering it's like an epic fantasy. And I do have a couple quotes to share with you. And then he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the alley, the shadow of his heavy footstep on cobbled road, the last of him that you remember. It seemed then, and even now, as but a dream. Your father was gone in one willful movement, and you heard a small snip somewhere inside of yourself, which was the sound of your life untethered from this earth. Fathers leave in all sorts of ways. Some of them leave in the dark, some leave only in their heads, while their bodies remain, staring at the world around them forever distantly. Others fade out over time, like an old photo rubbed raw, many gone in an instant. Tides have gone up and down. Waves large and small have crashed against the rocky cliffs of the eastern coast, but never in the history of all the emperors, Nowhere in all of their records had the waters ever withdrawn completely. One might think it amazing that in the face of such overwhelming evidence, no effort was made to save themselves. But though I cannot help but wish that when the world quirks and shudders, we have the wherewithal to listen. Even I cannot deny how difficult it can be to accept that sometimes, to survive, we must change our course. So yes, absolutely beautiful. I mean, that just barely scratches the surface of this beautiful writing. If you are a fantasy reader, I highly, highly recommend this. 5 stars. So that'll do it for my January wrap up. Started out the year strong. I not only met but exceeded my goal of 100 pages a day. I read some highly anticipated books. I got a couple series read, and I have some new favorites. And I'd love to hear, have you read any of these books? What did you think? And if you haven't read any yet, are you now? Have you added any to your TBR? Please let me know which ones. And if you'd like to leave a comment and let me know that you've made it this far into the video, go ahead and leave a pine tree emoji to represent the Wayward Pine trilogy, one of my favorite series that I've read so far this year. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single view, like, and comment. Happy reading. I will see you on the next one.